What is up, guys, and welcome back to another vlog. I'm just kidding, just another programming tutorial today. In this video, we are going to learn how to build a GUI application, so Graphical User Interface. And to do that, we will be using Python TKinter library. So by the end of the video, you'll have something that looks like this. So we have this little widget on the screen, and I can resize this widget, which is kind of nice. It's something that I don't see with a lot of TKinter apps. But what this app does is, if I type in a city, so I live in Boston, and I click Get Weather, well, it gives me Boston's current weather conditions, and I can do this for any city. So I could type in like Miami. I could also type in foreign cities like Madrid, España. And you have to use this country code when you do that. And I also can, which is kind of nice, I can do zip codes. So for Boston, one of the zip codes is 02215. And this defaults to, I think, Spain's 02215. So if I do 02215 US, I get Boston as well. So that is what we're going to be building. So basically, how this video is going to work is we will start out with kind of the basics of TKinter and then kind of build up into having the basis of what you see on the screen right now. And then once we have the basis, we'll connect it to a weather API and then kind of put all the pieces together. And then actually the last thing we'll do is we'll actually make it an executable so you can run this wherever. Before we begin, if you enjoy my videos, it would mean a lot to me if you throw this channel a subscribe. Also, if you could, this would be super, super awesome. I want to like start kind of doing programming competitions and like giveaways. So if you also shoot my Instagram and Twitter a follow, that'd be awesome because I'm going to announce all of that type of stuff in those places. Okay, to begin, open up a new Python file. Doesn't matter what you call it. I'm going to call mine, I think, weatherapp.py. And we'll also want to install some libraries. We're not going to need them immediately, but it wouldn't hurt just to be prepared to install a couple of libraries. And those are, so you want to open up a terminal window and type in pip install requests. This is how we're going to deal with the API. And I already have it. And then we'll also want to install pip install pillow. Pillow is a maintained fork of this pill library. Pill stands for Python Imaging Library. And we'll be using this to kind of just handle some image stuff while we build our GUI. And you're also probably going to see that I have this. Okay, so do that to just get prepared. The Tkinter library comes default, and so does, I think, one other library, URL lib, that you'll see in this video. That comes default. And just to let you guys know, I'll be programming in Python 3 and using Sublime Text 3 as my editor. We'll start building our app with the following lines. So we first need to import the Tkinter library. And we'll do that, import Tkinter as TK. And then every app we build with Tkinter needs to have a root, like a root window, kind of to place everything into. So to make that root window, you do root equals tk.tk. And then to run your application, so this is just a single window, nothing in it yet, we do root.main loop. So everything that we're going to want to place in our application is going to be in between these two lines. And if I run this, you see we have our first little GUI application. Super fun. Nothing much here, but we start placing stuff into this screen. So now that we have this little window up, let's actually start placing like real widgets into our GUI app. And I think the best place for documentation, I was looking at the official like Tkinter docs, and I didn't think they were that great. So I'm going to share this tutorials point link, and I'll put this in the description. But I found this was a helpful spot to go to like figure out what you could do with Tkinter. So if we go down here, it lists out all the widgets that you can use. I think this is all of them. So let's start out with a pretty simple widget. Let's add a button to our screen. So we're gonna just kind of go through the basics, and then we'll actually start building up to that app that I showed you at the start of the video. So we'll just call this button equals, and if we click on this button over here in the docs, and go down a bit. It kind of shows us how to use it. So W equals button, and actually I think gives an example down here. So shows a little bit more of an example down here. And one thing to note with this is, if you can see this, maybe I make this a little bit bigger over here, but they don't use TK dot button, and that's because they imported it differently. But I'm going to just keep it as we imported it. And so when we call this, we'll do TK dot button, and we want to place our button in the root. So it's kind of a nested structure. So the root contains everything, and then when we want to start putting things in specific containers, we start from the root, and we just can keep like placing things in from there. And that will make more sense in a sec. So TK button, root is where we're going to pass it in, and we'll set the text to be test button, and that will be fine for now. So let's build that now. Where's our button? So we have our button defined, but we need to actually like place it. So the first way we can do that is we can do button.pack, and that will put it on the screen. And you see that little button right here on the screen. The pack made things a little weird, but we do have a button. One thing I should mention regarding this button is, you notice how I put the text, I passed it in as a keyword argument like this. If you look at the documentation here, these option and descriptions are all the different values you can pass in as keyword arguments like this. So I could also do, and this is true for all the widgets we'll work with, so I could do background equals, let's say, gray. I think this should work. You could use gray, or you could use a hexadecimal color if you're familiar with that. So now you see the button on the screen. It's small, but we can see it's gray. I could also do foreground, or let's say, yeah, I could do foreground equals red to change up the, I'll make this a little smaller so you can see. Foreground equals red. And now we have this button. So all these keyword arguments are right here, and that, look at the documentation to see what you can really kind of do there. Okay, now that we have quickly gone through the keyword arguments, one thing that's really bothering me right now about our widget is how small it is. Like I'm literally trying to move this on the screen, and I can't even find a spot where I can move it because this is so small. I guess now I can move it. Okay. So let's make a container that will place this button in. So there's a couple different ways to do this. I would say I like to start out with a canvas. So if I go back in the docs, and I might just push the docs to the side of the screen for now because I want to make my code a little bit bigger. But yeah, you see this canvas widget. So we're going to use one of these to set our initial size. I'm going to hide this for a bit. Okay. So we'll call this canvas equals tk.canvas. It's going to be defined just as we defined our button. It's going to go into the root just like our button did. And now we can, this has two parameters. Let's see if I can bring this back in for a second. Height here, and I think there's a width somewhere in here. Yeah, width. So we can pass those in, and then what's nice about this canvas is if we at the top define, I'm going to call this height equals 700 pixels and width equals 1000, or let's make it a little smaller, 800 pixels. Now I can pass in those values, and you could pass them in directly, but I like to write out my variables so I don't pop in magic numbers all over the place. I know what these values are and I can easily change them. Width equals width. And I'll do canvas.pack, and this should now give us a bigger window, which is definitely nice. I need to stop wiggling around this thing on the screen because every time I wiggle this around, that's the wrong one. I wiggle it around, it closes my other window. I tend to use this canvas kind of as a placeholder to like kind of get my initial screen size something that I like. But to actually start like really organizing the widgets I put on the screen, I'll use a frame. So I'm going to define frame equals tk.frame. I'm going to make the root the parent of it. And so instead of packing, I'm going to go through the differences between packing, placing, and then there's also this thing called grid in a second. But I'm going to do frame.place. And actually, I'll make a color for this just so you can see exactly what it is. So we have red, we have white. We'll make this blue so we can see it pretty easily. Frame.place. And the nice thing about this place function is I can do relative width equals 1, relative height equals 1, and that will just kind of fill whatever the parent is. So now you see that we have this frame that fills the entire screen. And if I wanted to make that a little, not the entire screen, I could do something like relative width, let's say equals 0.8, relative height equals 0.8, and now we can run that. Now it's like that. And then we could center this if we wanted to by doing relative x equals 0.1, because that would give 0.1 on one side and 0.1 on the other side. And I guess relative y equals 0.1 as well. And that's kind of like the percentage of the screen. So if you think of 0.1 as 10% in. Now I run this. You see you have this frame that's right in the center of everything. And the nice thing about this is it adjusts with the screen as I change it. So the relative width and relative height of the place function is really nice because of this, for this purpose. And just because this blue is kind of tough on my eyes, it's like a very sharp blue, what I'm going to show you is we can use these hexadecimal colors. So I want like a kind of a light shade of blue, something that's pretty easy on my eyes. So I'm going to do something like this. This hex value is 80C1FF, and I can actually just pass this into the background and it will pick that color instead. Oh, I have to do hexadecimal hashtag 80. So now we have this a little bit easier on our eyes color, and I could do something similar with the button. So maybe with the button I wanted to keep the text default and not make it that. I could also, with the button, now I'm going to pass it into my frame instead of the root. So the background, actually we can just leave it gray. Let's see how this looks. So now we have our little button here inside of our frame. Okay, let's add a couple more widgets so we can learn how to organize them in different ways. So we'll add, to begin with, a label widget, tk.label. We'll also put this in the frame, and I'll just make the text like this. This is a label. And just because it'll help probably while we're organizing to like really see what is what, I'll make this yellow, and I will pack that in. And let's also make a entry bar, and that's tk.entry. Also put this in the frame. You don't need to put anything here, but we'll make a background here of green. Entry.pack. Okay, so what does this look like without making any modifications further? So we got the three widgets all on the screen, which is good. And you can see that they're color coded. This one you can type in, hello there. But they're just, they don't look good. They're stacked on top of each other, and definitely not what we're probably shooting for in the long term. So let's first talk about how we can use this pack to organize them a bit. So the first thing, so I'll pull in the docs real quick for pack. So with this pack, there's a couple different options we have. So we have expand, fill, and side. We can pass in as keyword arguments. So let's start with side. So I'm going to say side equals left here for the button. And what happens to our app when we do that? You see the test button now is on the left side while these are still over here. I can continue to do that for each of these other ones. I can do side equals, how about, what are our options? Could do right here. And so now the label is going to be on the right and the button is going to be on the left. And this is still up here by default. It's also interesting to note that you could do both of them on the left. And then what happens is, because we put the button down first, it fills all the way to the left, and then the label doesn't override the button, but it just kind of sits right next to it. So we could also do that with our entry as well. And now they're all aligned, which is good to see, I would say. And let's see, what else can we do? So we can use expand and fill. So we'll start out with showing what fill does. Fill equals tk.both, or I can just write both here, I think. So as you can see, fill, you can set whether you want to fill the X, the Y, or both. I did both, so it fills the given space inside whatever its parent is, and its parent is the frame, so that's why it's filling completely the parent. What I also could do is expand equals true. And if I expand it, basically it will give like a greater amount of the frame, it will give a greater amount of the space the frame has to this button widget. So this will now be like a big fat button, yeah, as you can see. So I could also fill equals both for these. So I don't know, it's not like terrible. It's easy enough to organize things pretty quickly and like make them fill the screen. And because we did this fill, that's also responsive, which is nice to see. Obviously our frame's a little big, so I could drop the frame's height a bit. So let's say our relative height is 0.5. As you can see, these fill whatever the frame is. They'll expand and fill up to that. Just to see the difference between filling both and filling just the X, I'll type in X here instead of both. And I'm looking down over here at the documentation to figure out how I'm doing this. If I do just X, now it still fills that space that it's allotted, but it only fills it in the X direction. And you can really play around with this. It works decently, but my one issue with pack and why I kind of prefer place over it is I think place gives you like the ultimate flexibility. All right, so we have done pack. Now let's also look at grid. So I'm gonna delete this. I think I can do button grid, row equals 0. This is another way to organize things. So just bear with me real quick while I finish writing this. Label.grid, row equals 0. And we'll make this next to it, so column equals 1. And then finally, and I'll close this out for a sec. I'll open up the grid documentation right after I finish writing this example. Entry.grid, row equals 0, column equals 2. So let's see what that does. So that aligns all of these things like that, which is pretty nice and easy. All right, let's pull in the documentation for grid. So it's another way to organize. And as you can kind of see with this window that I'm circling with the mouse, it allows you to, as the name says, stack things and organize things in a grid formation. So basically, by providing the row and column, you can kind of specify where in your grid you want to place certain things. So if I switch this up to like row 1, column 1, and row 2, column 2, now we're going to get like a diagonal stack of these things, as you can see. So grid is nice. I like grid, but one thing that I have issues with, and it's, I'm sure there's probably some people that might prefer grid over other methods. I find it a little bit harder to like really make these the sizes I want when I'm making it a grid. I think there's a little bit more you have to configure to really like make it fill your space, and also like if I resize this, it's not as easy to be responsive when you put it in a grid formation. So for the sake of probably the rest of this video, I'm probably not going to use grid, but it is something that's worthwhile looking into if you do have a lot of things that you need to stack and organize in a grid formation. So finally, let's talk about place. And I like place the best, honestly. I think it gives you the most control of what you're doing with your GUI. I guess as a result of that though, because you have more control, sometimes you have to know what you're doing a little bit more. But I don't think it's too difficult to get the hang of. So let's bring in the documentation for place as well. So basically, we've already seen me place something here. You can use rel x, rel y, rel width, rel height, and that makes it really easy to put exactly where we want something within one of the parents. So let's see. These are all of the different keyword arguments we have. Anchor is also important because that's kind of saying when we're talking about this relative x and this relative y, or I guess we could also use absolute x, absolute y. Anchor is telling us what point is going to be at that position. So if we anchor in the northwest, that would be the top left is going to be at, for this case, like 0.1, 0.1. And I think northwest is default. So that's why our frame, as we have it now, is anchored right there. But if I set the frame with this place and I said anchor, what did I just do? If I said anchor equals, let's say, north, that's going to completely change where our frame is. Oh, doesn't like it. I can just do a lowercase n. So yeah, now it's putting the middle at that 0.01, 0.1 spot, and that's why it's like making our frame all weird now. So anchor is good to know about. But let's play around with actually placing our widgets that we have on this frame. So what I'm going to do is fill them across the screen with a height that I like within the frame. So button.place rel x we'll start it right at 0. We'll start y right at 0. We'll say that the width should fill up, I think our button should be about a quarter of the screen, so I can do rel width equals 0.25, and I think it should fill up about also maybe a quarter, maybe half, let's say half of our frame. Or no, let's say a quarter. Okay, so that's, what does that do? And I screwed something up. Rel y, rel height this should be. Struggling. Right. And I'll move this over for a bit so we can see everything. Okay, sorry that got a little bit messy, but this is what we have here. And I'm going to just comment these out for a sec. As you can see, it does exactly what I wanted it to do. I wanted it right at the top left. I wanted it to go down a quarter. I wanted it to fill a quarter. So it's kind of nice with that. All right, let's now move our label. So one thing I'm going to do here with the label is instead of putting it right at 0.25, so because this is 0 and then we did a width of 2.5, if I start this rel x here for the label at 0.25, it will be exactly touching the test button. So I'm going to do 0.3. So I'm going to create a little bit of a gap between the label and the button. And rel width, I'm going to say equals, we can say that this label will take up half the screen, but because we have this little bit of a gap that we had, the 0.05 gap, we're going to say that this is 0.45. And then the height should be exactly the same as the button. It should be nice and flush with that. See that? Look at that. We got our button, we got our label, and then finally we can finish it off with placing our entry. So I'll have this fill up the rest of the screen. So we have 0.3 here plus 0.45, so that's going to give us 7.5. So if we wanted to gap this a little bit too, we could start at 0.8 So, and then to fill the rest of the screen, we do 0.2, and rel height would be the same. So as you can see, I'm doing a little bit more here. Like I'm having to type in a bit more, but I have this like complete control of how this looks. And this was supposed to be 0.25. So that looks, I mean, it doesn't look anything special right now, but you should be getting the feel that like, okay, I can move these things easily if I wanted to. Okay, now that we have this, and actually one thing I want to say real quick is note that with Place 2, it's nice and responsive. So that's something I enjoy about the Place as well. It makes it easier to make an app that is exactly how big you want it to be. But now that we know the basics of moving stuff around and like changing the color and whatnot, let's actually go back to that app I showed at the beginning of the video. So this app right here. And let's build this, put this together. And then what we're going to do once we put this together is learn how to like actually use the buttons and actually use this entry spot and actually collect the text from that entry and make it do something. Using this as our reference here. Okay, so we have a frame up here at the top, which has the entry and has the button. And then down here, we have another frame, which just has a big, weird label here. And then in the background, we have a image. So we'll save this image for the last, but we'll start with these we'll start with this top frame. So we can adjust our frame that we have right here. So I'm going to say, so how I defined the top frame was the relative X I put right in the middle. I did 0.5. Relative Y, I did 0.1, just like we had it. Made the relative width, take up 3/4 of the screen, and the height, relative height of this smaller top frame, I had that take up 0.1 of the screen. And the one thing I did just to make this relative X right at the center is I did anchor equals north. So just right at the top, you place that 0.5. So let's see what that does. Okay, so that's the start of our frame. Now we can go ahead and delete the label from that because we didn't use that in our app, or at least in that frame spot. Actually, I'll keep the label. I'm going to comment it out temporarily because we'll use the label down at the bottom. And I'm going to just move it below. Okay, and then the entry was on the left side of this. Doesn't really matter that I write it out at the above button, but just makes it easier for me to read from left to right. So the entry came first, and we're not going to have a background color anymore. It's still going to be inside the frame, but now we're going to change up the positioning. So with our entry, we're going to put that at I'm going to just ignore this real quick. What I did for the entry box, I just did relative width equals 0.65 and relative height, fill the entire thing, so 1. And one nice little thing I did as well is when you're defining your entry, you can actually set the font. So I set the font to be a bit bigger, so I set it to be 40. So let's see what that does. So now we have this text box right there. Our button is in the way right now, so let's move our button to be in the right spot. I'm going to get rid of this gray, but I'm going to make the font 40 for the button as well. And where I placed the button when I was showing you that app was at relative X 0.7. So that's going to create a little bit of space between the entry and the button because this is 0.65, and I think it defaults to 0, 0, X, Y coordinates. And I'll put the relative height equal 1, and the relative width here, we want it to finish up and fill the rest of the screen, so that's going to be 0.3. Look at that. So now we have that. The one thing we don't have, one thing that's a little bit annoying potentially, is it doesn't leave any border space. And there's a nice little keyword argument we can pass into the frame up here to specify that. So I'm going to say BD, which is border, equals 5 here. Now we got exactly kind of what we were looking for with the top of our app. So let me just share this. So as you can see, it's pretty identical. The color's a little bit different. So now let's do the lower frame. So down here, we'll define a lower frame. That's going to be defined the same way as our upper frame was, tk.frame. We're going to make the root the parent. We'll take the same exact background color we used up here. Probably use the same exact border as well, so I'll just copy that in. And let's see. I guess actually I made the border down here 10. Doesn't really matter. Lower frame dot place, and the positioning of this, I'm just reading off what I did in the past just so it's the same. 0.5 rel y equals 0.25, so it takes up a quarter, or so it starts a quarter of the way down. Relative width is going to be 0.75, just like we had with our upper frame right here. And then the relative height, this is going to be a bit bigger, so that's going to be 0.6. And once again, just to get this relative x to make it right in the center, I'm going to make the anchor equal north. Look at that. We're almost there. So next, we want to put our label inside of that. So I'm going to uncomment this again. So now instead of going into our frame, this label is going to go into our lower frame. And we're going to have to play around with the settings a little bit here. Actually, no, we don't, because place is really nice. So if I go ahead and start this at the same exact spot that we started the lower frame, so 0.75, or sorry, or I don't even have to specify anything. Okay, so our label, I just want it to fill the entire thing, but we're going to have the border on the frame, so it will leave a little bit of space. So I can just do relative width equals 1 and relative height equals 1. And watch this. There we go. That's exactly what we basically had before. I'm going to delete the text so it's just white to start, and I make the background, get rid of that. And we have, if we open up our side by side, basically the same thing. I guess to get it to be the exact same size, I made my height 500 and my width 600 here. So now we have that. I might have stretched this a little bit before. Okay, so we basically have the same thing. The last touch to make this identical before we actually play around with the button is to get that background image. To add the background image, you first want to have a background image. So I'm going to be using this landscape.png image. I'll include that with it, the source code for this, everything we do in this video on my GitHub page, and that'll be in the description. So you can find this image if you want it there. But really you can use any image you want for your background, but just make sure to include it in the same directory that you have your code. So as you can see, the weather app's right here. This is in the same directory. So what we're going to do this is we'll define a label, or I guess we'll start out with just defining the background image. So the background image, to get a image in Tkinter, you can do tk.photoimage. And then you're going to have to do file equals, and then you pass the path to the file. So if you include it in the same directory, you just need to do // and then actually you probably could just go ahead and do the name of the file. So landscape.png, but you can also pass in paths here. So you could, like, if it was in some other directory, you could do that just fine. So then we'll define background label, and that will be just a normal label that uses our root as the background, and we're going to set image equal to background image, and then we'll use this, our favorite function .place, to make it fill the entire, I guess, backdrop. So that'll be, I'm going to just have it start at x equals 0, y equals 0. I think that this was helpful when I was doing it, but really the important part is rel width equals 1 and rel height equals 1. I might be able to get rid of this. Let me just check. We'll delete it to start and see how it looks. Yeah, it looks pretty good. So I don't even think you needed that x equals 0 and y equals 0. But yeah, this is exactly what I kind of had as the background when I was initially showing you guys this app. So that looks pretty good. All right, now let's go ahead and actually implement some functionality. And I just realized as I'm looking at this, let's change this to get weather because that's what we're ultimately trying to do. But we're trying to make the button actually, the button click actually do something. So how do we do that? Well, we go into our button, and when we define it, we want to pass in the keyword argument command, and then we can define whatever function we want and have that button press trigger that function. So let's just do test function right now. And we'll just have that print out button clicked. And I'll save that. So now I go down here to command and I do test function. And I can just pass it in like this. I don't need to put the parentheses like you normally would. And I can go ahead and let's see what happens. If we look down here in the bottom left, you should see button clicked. Yep, cool. However, this gets into the tricky part where, let's say we wanted to pass in some sort of variable. So in our case, what we're gonna wanna pass in when we get the weather is gonna be what's in the entry here. So there's a little bit of an issue when you try to like say entry, and then I do, this is the entry. Okay, so a couple things here. We can get the entry text within this entry by doing the following. We can do, there's a get function on the entry. So what I would pass into this is entry.get. And run that. So if I type in Boston, we would want it to say this is the entry and then Boston when I click it. However, the problem is this code right here executes ahead of time. So when we write it like this, it runs once, but then it like won't update our entry. So what we need to do is define what is called a lambda function. Lambda is an inline function. It's used sometimes if you want to you need to do something on a single line. I don't know. Sorry. It's used, like this is a perfect example of why it might be used. It's defined like at the time that it's like run. So it's temporarily kind of stored in memory and then it can be kind of gotten rid of. So when we type this button click, it's redefined every time we click it. So we can do get weather text box.get here. And now because we define it as a lambda, whenever we click it, it will redefine it and actually get the current state of the text box using this lambda function. Let's see what happens. Oh no, happens now. So Boston, we want it to say the entry is Boston. Oh no. Oh, why did I call it get weather? Sorry, I called it get weather before. So this was test function. And look at the bottom left and you should see the right result. I also, instead of calling it entry, I called it text box because I'm reading my other code. Boston. The entry is Boston. Awesome. Okay, now that we've connected our button to our entry and kind of seen how that works, let's switch gears a little bit and connect to our weather API. And if you're unfamiliar, API stands for Application Programming Interface. And basically what that means is APIs on any sort of site or server is our way as a programmer to communicate with that server and get information back and also push information to the server. So when I say weather API, we're basically have a way to query this weather server and get back results in a programmatic fashion. So that's what the API does. So what I want you to do is to go to openweathermap.org, and I'll put this in the description probably too. Go ahead and sign up because it doesn't cost anything for the free tier, but however, it doesn't cost anything for the free tier, but sorry, I'm like doing two things at one time. But you do need, they restrict how much you can use in the free tier, and they give you a key once you sign up. So it's just good to do that. Okay, and once you have a password, you can type in I'm 16 years or older. I agree with privacy policy, whatnot. I am not a robot. Oh my gosh. I think apparently if you hold this button down, you don't have to do this thing. Oh my God. Create account. YouTube. Education. All right, so once you're signed in, you can go to API, or actually API keys, and you'll want to copy this key down. And I'm going to delete this key after this video, so you can't use my key, but you can make your own key. It's pretty straightforward. And I'm just going to paste it as a comment for now. So a little bit about this weather API, what we're going to be querying, if I look at this API here, at the free tier, you get this 5-day, 3-hour forecast, I believe. Let's see. Yeah, 5-day, 3-hour forecast and current weather API. You can get more stuff if you actually pay, but for the sake of this, I'm not paying for anything. Okay. And basically, we're going to be querying this endpoint right here. And this is going to give us, as it says, the 5-day, 3-hour forecast data. So we'll be getting back a JSON object from these requests, and you'll see that in a sec. But I'm going to copy down this URL. And I'll paste that as a comment too right now. And to see an example, this is what it's going to kind of look like. They probably have an example down here somewhere. Yeah, this is basically like what it's going to look like when we get back. And this is JSON, but also if you just are familiar with like Python dictionaries, that's kind of how you interact with it. And if you're not familiar with Python dictionaries or APIs and dealing with it in general, I'll link to some videos, not of my own. I'll probably do my own at some point, but that you can use as reference for these things. All right, so let's write a function called getWeather, which will take in the city, which is actually going to just be our entry that we got from the text bar, or yeah, it's just going to be our entry text. And that we'll define our weather key equals, that was this right here. And also, now that we're making an API request, we're going to have to import the requests library that we installed at the start of the video. So that's our weather key. I'm going to define the URL equal to the first half part of this up to the forecast. And actually, I'm going to use, I don't know if it will really change much. Yeah, well, I'll play around with it in a sec. That would be the URL, and I'm going to have that use HTTPS. I don't know if this matters or not. It's our URL. Then we're going to define our params. So this is what we're like sending when we try to request something from the server. So the first thing we'll have to pass in is our app ID, and that's the weather key. So I can do app ID equals weather key. This is a dictionary we're defining. If you look at this, it needs a Q value. That's what we actually do to actually get the correct city back. So I'm going to do Q, and that is going to be equal to the city that we pass in. And then finally, this is just, I think, I think by default it's Celsius. So if you're on the Celsius scale, you don't have to do this, or actually it might be Kelvin by default. So units, I'm going to do imperial because I am a silly American. Let me see, Celsius. Okay, yeah, here are your units: Kelvin, metric, or imperial. Yeah. So you would have to fill in metric if you wanted it in Celsius, but I want it in imperial for now. Okay, that's our params. Response equals requests, and now we're going to send a get request. So this is how we're going to hit the API, the weather API. We're going to pass it to that URL and pass in the params we just defined. And I'm going to just print response.json. This JSON will convert it into basically the Python dictionary that we can work with easily. And we'll leave it at that for now. Let's see if this works. So I'm going to change this to be get weather. And let's see what happens. And we're going to be printing it down here, so I'll open this up a bit. Boston, get weather. Oh, nice. Yeah, we got a lot of stuff here. This is a lot to work with. So instead of doing the forecast, what I'm going to do is the current weather. And that was just defined at a different URL spot. So you see how this says at the top of this, it's call 5-day, 3-hour forecast data. If I instead just did current weather data, that's what I was showing in my example. So I can just, instead of forecast here, I do weather. But you could see how you might want to take this application further, maybe use a full 5-day forecast weather. And now let's see what we get when we pass it in. Boston, and look at that. This is name Boston, condition, and it has all sorts of information. So let's see if we can find the temperature is 41.23 degrees Fahrenheit. So we need to now take this response. This was the response.json, and basically navigate and get things out of it that we want. So that's what we'll do now. I'm going to rename response.json. I'm going to call it weather.json, or let's just call it weather to make it easier for ourselves. That's equal to response.json. And now if we look at this, so, and also let me just real quick show what we had before so this is the app that I built before this video started. If I click Boston, it gives me the city, gives me the conditions, and temperature. So I'm going to do those same 3 things. How do we navigate to that? So first, the city. So if I go down here, you see name Boston. So I just need to, if I want to get the name, I can do weather, and I'll just print this out to make it easy to see it first. Weather, and then the key is name right here. It's not nested at all, so it should just do that. Then I want the conditions. So to get the current conditions, it's going to be the first entry of this weather list right here. So to get that, I can do weather, and then I need a key in to the weather that's right here. So weather. And then I want to get the first entry. As you can see that this is a list right here. So I want to get the 0th entry, the first entry, and then I want to get the description like that. So first entry, and then as you can see, once you're in that first entry, we're at this dictionary object. So we can just get the description key there. And then finally, I wanted to print out the temperature too. So that was the same spot basically, weather 0, and then if you look a bit, you'll see temperature somewhere here, I believe. Maybe it's a different spot. I guess we can go into main and then temperature. So instead of that, we'll do main, and then we can get temp. Okay, let's see what happens when we now click Boston. Click. City is Boston, overcast clouds, 41.23 degrees Fahrenheit. Awesome. And one reason that I included the name, because I could also do 02215 US, and that also gets me Boston. So that's why I like to have the name in case you were doing a zip code, just to make sure you were getting the right area. We can also just real quick check to make sure it will like accept like a foreign city like Madrid, as I said. Let's do another. Let's do, how about London, UK? I think it would be, it might be Great Britain. Yeah, same thing. Yeah, so it works for these foreign places too. Cool. All right, so now we want to format these values that we just took right here. So this is name. And I'm actually going to abstract this to another function, call it format response. And that will take in the weather JSON. And so how we're going to do this is name equals weather. I'm just going to copy basically exactly what we had. Description equals all of this. And then finally, temp equals this. And then basically what we want to do is we have this label down here, and we want to populate the text property of that label. And we can do that actually after the fact, after we've already defined this, even though we didn't define any text in this label originally. So if I went ahead and just to begin with, and I did label text equals name plus description plus temperature, and I ran this, and actually I guess I have to, instead of doing this, I'll return, and I'll add spaces in between. Okay. Now if I in get weather, I do label, text property of the label equals format response of the weather JSON. Watch what happens. Boston. Oops. Okay. I'm gonna surround these with string. And I'm going to show you a better way to do this in 1 second. But it's complaining about the temperature because the temperature is a integer, or not an integer, but a float value. So Boston. Look at that, Boston, overcast clouds, 41.23, and then that means degrees Fahrenheit. So we're almost there. What we'll do, though, is we're going to use, I guess it's percent notation when we format this. So how we're going to do this is I'm going to say, and I guess we can also do a try, surround this with a try except, because what if we pass in a name that's not valid? We want it to still return something good. So we're going to try, we'll call this final string, except, and if we fail in the try except, and some of these things that I'm introducing in this video might be new to you. Don't try to get like too weighed down and like seeing something new, but just try to understand how it ends up kind of working out. So basically it's going to try to find all of these properties of this weather JSON you passed in. But if that's invalid, then it'll just the kind of fallback will be there was a problem retrieving that information. And instead of doing it this way, what I'm going to do here is use this percent notation. I'm going to use city. And this might be a new notation for you too, but if I do %s, I'm saying placeholder for a string, /n means new line, conditions, I'm going to do another string, and then new line, and then temperature. And I'm going to have to copy this character in because this is a weird character. I don't know how to type it normally, but I'm going to do the degrees symbol on Fahrenheit. And that is going to be another string value. And then finally, to pass in the string values that I want there, I do name, description, and temperature. And then watch this. So now we're going to return the final string. Watch what happens. Boston. Look at that. Looks kind of cool. I actually kind of like it right here in the center. It's a little small, but overall I kind of like the look of that. Let's make it a little bit bigger though. I just realized as I was going through this that before when I was changing the font like this, that wasn't actually really doing much. So I apologize for that, but we're gonna actually fix how to work the font. So if I run this, do like Boston, right? It's pretty small. I think if I did font equals 40 here, I think it makes it a little bit bigger. You can be the judge of this. I think it's a little bit bigger, but I think it's just because it's like trying to find the font name of 40 and it can't, and it's doing some sort of like weird fallback that's a little bit of a different size, because if I make this like 1000, doesn't change. So I did find the solution though, and so what we can do is if you go to the top of your screen and do import, from Tkinter import font, you can actually see all the fonts that you have access to by doing print tk.font.families. So if I look at all of this down the bottom, you have a lot of fonts you can use. Let's say I wanted to use modern, sounds good. What we want to do to set our font is go into the label, and you do use the same font keyword argument, but now instead of just doing the size, you do the name of the font you want to use. So we're going to use modern. I have actually no idea what this looks like, so we'll find out. And then the size, and I think this is in pixels. Run. And Boston. Yeah, so now you can see it's much bigger. I don't really love this, so I'm going to go with, I think, Courier. I'll do like 18. Yeah, so these are all of our fonts down here. I'm going to delete this though. Boston. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. And if I wanted to, I could also change up the other spots that I did this. So I could do it right here. And I could do it right here. Oh, gotta make it a little smaller here. Yeah, I like this. Get weather. Cool. And if you wanted to do how I initially set it up and like justify it in the same way, the commands you'd have to pass in are anchor equals northwest, justify. We'll just see what that looks like. Anchor northwest, Boston, get weather. So now it's on the left, but I want it aligned to the left, so I'm going to do justify equals left, and I'll do a slight border so it leaves a little bit of space. I have 4. Build Boston. Cool, that looks pretty good. The final thing I wanted to do before we made the executable was, if you recall with the initial app I showed, there's this icon over here in the top right. Well, just due to time, and this video is already like an hour long, I'm not going to go through this piece by piece, like everything about this, but I'll get you started so you could do this too if you wanted to. It all starts with, if I print out this JSON, you can see kind of what I'm talking about. All starts with, when I type in a city like Boston, the open weather map gives an icon for each weather condition. So you see over here, and I'll pull this up because my head might be in the way. It gives the icon 0 to D. And so that's those icons, those like keys, are all stored on the open weather map site. So on my GitHub page and also right here, there's this get weather icon script that I wrote. So if you run this script, it will query the open weather map site for all of these different images and then save them locally in this .image directory. And then from that, you can use this icon value based on the current JSON and kind of select the proper icon. And the final code with the icons will be called weather app with icons on that same GitHub link that you can find. Let me pull it in. On my GitHub page, GUI, this will be in the description as well, weather app with icons, and then that script to get the icons is right here. Okay, finally, to end this video, we're going to be using PyInstaller to make this app an executable. So like you could send it, for example, to someone that doesn't have Python installed and they could still run and see your app. And so to do that, what we're going to need to do is first download PyInstaller. So you can go to pyinstaller.readthedocs.io/nstable to find any information on PyInstaller, but it boils down to something that's as easy as doing pip install PyInstaller. And I already have it. And then what you're going to want to do is go to whatever directory that you have your code saved in. And you're going to want to run the line PyInstaller, the executable of PyInstaller. It might be slightly different for Mac. Not positive. One file, -- icon. So the icon I have is, I think, sun icon. Let me double check. This is also in that. So sunicon.ico. And you can download that from the GitHub right here. Or you could use your own image. So sunicon.ico, and then main.py. Instead of that, we want to do weather app.py. So it'll take a second or two. So I'm just gonna let this run. So it's successfully completed. And if you go to that same folder, if you go into distribution, you now have the app. And if you open it up, let's see, will it run? So it didn't seem to run, and one reason it might not have run is that any image or something that you included when you were building it, you need to put it into this distribution folder. Basically, it's going to be looking for paths, and if it can't find those paths, like the image is in the correct path, so if you put stuff in your current directory, it's not going to be able to find your current directory because that's back here. So you could, I guess, also move this into your original directory as well. But it's usually easier to just all package everything else, everything you need into this distribution directory. But now that I'm running this, I can do Boston. And let's see, go, come on. And yeah, you might get like some sort of, if you have a firewall or something, it might be like, oh, what is this doing? But it's safe. It's safe to use a PyInstaller built app. So I'm gonna hit OK. And there it goes, it works. It's pretty cool. All right, that's all I'm gonna do for this video. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comment section and I'll try to get back to as many as I can. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to throw it a thumbs up and also subscribe so you don't miss any of my future videos. Thanks again, guys, for watching, and peace out.